My friends, history does not whisper softly. It roars when the tides of change are near. The Alaska summit stands not as a mere gathering of leaders, but as a sunrise over distant mountains, reminding us that when courage meets opportunity, nations rise beyond their shadows. My friends, the Alaska it is more than a political gathering. It is the rising of a new dawn for India. The first and most powerful truth about this moment is that it is a canvas where India's voice paints itself bold. For too long, nations have spoken of India in tones of curiosity, admiration, or even skepticism, but this summit marks the shift from being observed to being acknowledged. At that table, beneath the northern lights and the chill of Alaska's air, India's presence was not faint, nor was it incidental. It was firm, deliberate, and commanding. A voice that once was drowned in the noise of global powers now echoes with clarity. And in that echo lies the declaration that India is no longer simply a participant in the world's affairs. It is a shaper of them. To be heard is a victory greater than applause, for it signifies recognition. India's voice at Alaska was not simply the voice of diplomats and leaders, but the voice of over 1 billion people whose dreams, struggles, and resilience travel with every word spoken in their name. The world watched and listened, and in that act of listening, respect was forged. When respect enters a conversation, power begins to shift. That is the essence of what took place. India stepped forward, not asking to be included, but claiming its rightful space, and in doing so, it painted the global canvas with strokes of determination and dignity. When a nation's voice is bold, it inspires others to adjust their gaze. The nations gathered in Alaska did not just look at India as an ally of convenience. They saw it as a pillar of stability and innovation in a turbulent world. The strength of India's stance resonated beyond words. It was in the quiet confidence, the refusal to bend, and the vision projected for the future. That kind of presence cannot be ignored. It is the presence of a nation that has weathered storms, that has carved its path from colonial shadows to the front lines of progress, and now refuses to be silenced or sidelined. The boldness of India's voice is also an invitation to its people. It whispers to the farmers, the workers, the students, and the dreamers that their sacrifices have not gone unseen. It declares to the young innovators writing code in Bangalore, and to the scientists reaching for the stars in Sriharikota, that their work matters not just within India, but across the world. Their voices, once confined to the boundaries of their land, now resonate in global corridors of decision-making. The Alaska summit turned the page, allowing every citizen to feel that their country does not merely exist in the world, it leads within it. But this boldness is not arrogance, it is balance. It is a recognition that being heard is not about speaking the loudest, but about speaking with purpose, with clarity, and with the weight of history. India's words in Alaska were not the words of a nation demanding pity or assistance. They were the words of a nation offering vision, strength, and partnership. That is why this moment matters. It is not just the amplification of sound, but the transformation of meaning. India spoke, and the world listened, not out of courtesy, but out of necessity. The Alaska its first gift to India is this: a new identity in the eyes of the world, an identity rooted not in what India once was, but in what India has become. A nation bold in speech, dignified in posture, and unstoppable in its march forward. To be heard is to be respected, and to be respected is to change destiny. And destiny, in this moment, leans in India's favor. The Alaska summit opened a new door for India, a door not carved by need, but by dignity. It was not the entrance of a nation seeking help or favor, but the steady step of a country standing tall, prepared to meet equals, prepared to speak of tomorrow without bowing to yesterday. In that hole of power and ambition, India did not come to the table with desperation, it came with determination, and that difference matters because the world recognizes when a nation negotiates from strength rather than from weakness. India showed that true partnerships are not forged in the shadows of dependency, but in the light of mutual respect. For too long, many nations have believed that alliances meant one side leading and the other following, one giving and the other receiving, one demanding and the other complying. The Alaska Summit challenged that outdated script. India stood before the world, not as a passive listener to the designs of others, but as an architect of its own vision. The message was unshakable. India is ready to walk alongside, not behind. Its hand is extended, not as a beggar's hand seeking sustenance, but as a strong and open palm offering collaboration, offering courage, offering possibility. This shift changes the very soul of diplomacy. Where dependency breeds silence, dignity breeds voice. When a nation feels indebted, it rarely speaks its full truth. But when a nation stands in its worth, its words carry conviction, its choices carry freedom, and its agreements carry balance. India's presence in Alaska declared that its partnerships will not be chains to bind it, but wings to lift it higher. And in that declaration, the world was reminded that the strongest alliances are those where both sides bring something meaningful to the table. India brings more than population, more than markets, more than geography. It brings resilience, innovation, and an unyielding spirit of survival. The Alaska Summit gave the stage for these qualities to shine, not as bargaining tools, but as undeniable truths. Other nations looked at India not as a country to be shaped, but as a country to be respected. That respect is the seed from which genuine cooperation grows. When nations meet each other with dignity, they do not strip each other of sovereignty, they strengthen it. They do not exploit differences, they celebrate them. They do not dictate terms, they create them together. This is why the Alaska Summit, it was not merely political theater. It was the unfolding of a new standard in India's global relationships. The days of being overlooked are gone. The days of being underestimated are gone. India's stature is not borrowed, it is earned, and at Alaska, the world bore witness to that earned place. A partnership offered from dignity is a partnership that lasts longer, grows deeper, and shines brighter than one forced by dependency. It is also a lesson for the people of India themselves. When a nation's leaders show dignity abroad, it reflects the dignity of its people at home. Farmers tilling their fields, teachers guiding young minds, engineers designing new solutions, and soldiers standing guard at the borders, all of them are part of the same strength that walked into Alaska with quiet pride. Their labor, their courage, their sacrifices gave India the right to extend its hand not as a nation asking for favors, but as a nation offering friendship. That is the dignity of 1 billion people translated into the language of diplomacy. So, when India sat at the Alaska Summit, it reminded the world of something vital. True power is not the ability to impose, but the ability to inspire. True leadership is not about control, but about trust. India's partnerships are not chains, they are wings, and with those wings, India is ready to soar higher than ever before. The Alaska Summit, it was more than a conversation of leaders. It was a declaration of vision. For India, the focus was not on fear, but on future. Too often, nations gather with the weight of threats and the shadow of suspicion guiding their discussions. But India carried into that summit a different tone, a tone of clarity, of progress, of direction. It was not about reacting to the past. It was about shaping what comes next. And in that choice lies the strength of a nation that refuses to let its destiny be written by others. India claimed its place not as a guest in the global conversation, but as a host of new ideas and solutions. When fear dominates, nations build walls. When future dominates, they build bridges. At Alaska, India chose bridges, bridges of innovation, of energy, of security, and of cooperation. The conversations were not limited to what the world must prevent, but expanded into what the world can achieve. India's voice carried the urgency of a people who know that progress waits for no one, and that those who hesitate are left behind. In energy, India spoke of sustainable paths, not only for itself, but for a planet gasping under the weight of reckless consumption. In technology, it did not plead for access but demanded recognition as a creator, as a nation already shaping the digital frontier. And in matters of security, India's words carried balance, firm enough to assert its sovereignty, wise enough to avoid aggression. This is the essence of leadership, to speak not with the desperation of fear, but with the confidence of vision. India's presence at Alaska showed that it is not waiting for others to define its place in the global order. The age of dependency, of hesitation, of lingering in the shadows of greater powers is ending. The nation now carries its pen in hand, writing its own chapters in the book of world history. That pen does not sketch a future of submission, but a future of creation. India is not content to be a passive actor. It is determined to be a playwright, shaping the stage upon which the world will stand tomorrow. Every statement India made at Alaska reflected a truth its people already know. Fear cannot feed the hungry, fear cannot educate a child, fear cannot heal the sick, and fear cannot open the door to opportunity. Only vision can do that, and so the summit became more than a gathering. It became a mirror of India's future, reflecting the dreams of its young population, the determination of its entrepreneurs, the dedication of its scientists, and the resilience of its farmers. This was not about power for power's sake. It was about building a future where power is used as a tool for peace, growth, and justice. To speak of the future is also to invite responsibility. India did not seek easy promises at Alaska. It sought commitments grounded in mutual progress. It called for global systems that recognize equity, not exploitation, cooperation, not coercion. Such demands are not the language of fear, but of foresight, and foresight is what turns a summit from a meeting into a milestone. The Alaska summit therefore marks a turning point. India showed that a nation is truly powerful not when it dwells on threats, but when it dares to dream. Not when it guards its place jealously, but when it claims its role boldly. By focusing on the future instead of the fears, India did more than speak, it inspired. It inspired nations to look beyond conflict, to look toward possibility, to see that leadership is not in resisting the storms of yesterday, but in building the bridges of tomorrow. And in that vision, India stands tall, guiding not only itself but showing the world what it means to choose hope over hesitation, progress over paralysis, and the future over fear. The Alaska it was not about geography, it was about possibility. The cold winds that swept through Alaska were not barriers. They were reminders that distance cannot silence determination. India's presence in that faraway land sent a message across oceans and continents. This is not a nation confined by its borders. This is a nation whose voice carries to every corner of the earth. The discussions and declarations that took place were not limited to a small table in an icy state. They were amplified into a chorus heard from Delhi to Washington, from Tokyo to Brussels. India showed that it does not stand only for itself, but for a vision of progress that stretches beyond maps and boundaries. Too often, countries are measured by their geography. how many miles of land they possess, how many rivers flow within their borders, how many mountains rise upon their soil. But India reminded the world that true power is not measured in square miles, but in the strength of one's influence and the reach of one's vision. At Alaska, India stood not as a country boxed within South Asia, but as a global force, a nation whose decisions matter on the grand stage of humanity. That shift is monumental. It tells the world that India is not defined by where it is on the map, but by what it brings to the table of progress. This recognition is important because for decades, global attention often circled around established powers, leaving nations like India to fight for visibility. But the Alaska summit shattered that invisibility. India's participation did not go unnoticed. It commanded attention. Its words were not dismissed as regional concerns but embraced as global priorities. And when a nation achieves this kind of recognition, it steps into a new role, not of a follower but of a leader. India no longer waits to be invited into conversations. It creates conversations. It no longer watches as others decide the course of history. It writes lines into history itself. Possibility is what carried India's voice through the summit. Possibility that its technology can connect villages as well as cities. Possibility that its green energy initiatives can guide a world desperate for sustainability. Possibility that its democracy, despite all its challenges, can still be a beacon for nations seeking balance between freedom and order. These are not small contributions. They are transformative. And when India speaks of these possibilities, it does so not in whispers, but in firm tones that demand recognition. The Alaska summit also reflected how leadership today cannot be confined by distance. In an interconnected world, where decisions in one corner ripple across the globe, India showed that it is not too far, not too distant, not too isolated to influence outcomes. Its vision for economic cooperation, its insistence on fair trade, its call for balanced security, all of these were proof that India is ready to act not only as a regional guardian, but as a global partner. That readiness transforms the narrative from isolation to integration, from waiting to leading. For the people of India, this is more than politics. It is pride. It means that the farmer in Punjab, the teacher in Kerala, the coder in Hyderabad, and the student in Mumbai are all part of a nation that is not confined to its soil, but expanded through its influence. It means that every citizen contributes to the possibility that India represents on the world stage, and when those possibilities become actions, they transform into legacies that reach far beyond the present moment. The Alaska summit, then, becomes a reminder that a nation's power is not defined by the land beneath its feet, but by the horizon it dares to reach. India has shown that its horizon is not bound by the Indian Ocean, nor by the Himalayan peaks. Its horizon is the world itself, and it will continue to expand until the possibility of India becomes the reality of humanity. The Alaska summit revealed something deeper than diplomacy, something stronger than speeches. It became a mirror in which India could see its own soul. That reflection was not of missiles, markets, or mighty armies, but of the true strength that defines a nation, unity, conviction, and faith in tomorrow. The world often mistakes power for wealth or weapons, but India reminded them that real strength comes from people who believe in themselves and in their collective destiny. At Alaska, India carried the weight of over 1 billion voices, each whispering the same truth, that when a nation stands together, it cannot be bent or broken. Unity has always been the bedrock of India's journey. Diversity runs through its veins. Hundreds of languages, dozens of faiths, countless traditions. Yet it is this diversity that creates its resilience. The Alaska summit showed that India's unity is not fragile, but unshakable. It is not the silence of sameness but the harmony of differences. In every word spoken at that table, the world heard the echo of a country that knows how to hold together its contrasts and convert them into strength. That is a power no weapon can imitate. It is a power rooted in humanity itself. Conviction was the second truth reflected at the summit. India's leaders did not speak with hesitation or apology. They spoke with a certainty carved out of history and sacrifice. This conviction did not come from arrogance, but from experience. A nation that has endured colonial rule, that has fought wars, that has lifted millions out of poverty, that has risen again and again after being underestimated. Such a nation does not falter in its convictions. At Alaska, this conviction became a beacon. It told the world that India's direction is not accidental but deliberate, not imposed but chosen. Conviction is the courage to stand firm even when others doubt, and India's courage was unmistakable. Faith in tomorrow is the final reflection. India did not walk into the summit burdened by the shadows of the past, but carrying the light of the future. Faith is what drives a young student in Bangalore to code through the night. What compels a farmer in Punjab to sow seeds despite uncertain rains? What motivates a scientist in Hyderabad to push boundaries of space exploration? That same faith was present in Alaska, speaking through the representatives of a nation determined to build a future brighter than its present. Faith is what turns dreams into policies, ideas into inventions, challenges into opportunities. Without faith, progress is impossible. With faith, even the impossible bends. The Alaska summit reminded the world that India's strength is not just in statistics or strategies, but in its soul. It is in the quiet resilience of its people, in the unbreakable bonds of community, in the refusal to surrender to despair. Strength is not the number of ships in a navy or the size of a nation's economy alone. It is the spirit that refuses to be silenced, the heart that beats for progress, the mind that envisions possibility. India carried all of that into the cold halls of Alaska, and in doing so, warmed the world with hope. When a billion voices believe in their worth, when a billion hands work with purpose, when a billion hearts beat for the same tomorrow, there is no summit, no distance, no power that can dim that light. The Alaska Sum, it was not merely a political event. It was proof that India's greatest weapon is not force but faith, not control but conviction, not fear but unity. And from this foundation rises a strength that cannot be denied, a strength that tells the world, India is ready, India is steady, and India's light will not be hidden.